Morning, everyone. Can you just let me know if you can see my screen?
Just coming on now, Will. There you go. Yeah.
Right. How do I minimize this?
Right. Yeah, we can see what, reallocation of road space slide on the screen.
Okay. So just to give an overview, I think, and some illustrative examples of what was discussed. So what is reallocating road space? So repurposing space, typically from vehicles or parking to other transport uses, which could include providing wider footways, bus lanes, or cycle lanes. Some examples shown on the slide in the bottom left is a high street, I think it's in Preston, where they narrowed the vehicle carriageway to widen footways and provide planting, but still retain parking and vehicle access. On the bottom right-hand side is a residential street in Exeter, where we put in bollards to remove through vehicle traffic and create a quieter streets for pedestrians and residents. And the middle example is a green lane where we've actually closed off the through traffic to provide roughly a mile-long section of low traffic road, which is attractive for pedestrians and cyclists. Another example in a more urban setting is in Magdalen Road in Exeter. This is a popular neighbourhood centre with around 25 to 30 independent shops. We made changes as part of the emergency active travel measures, and there was previously a footway on both sides. I guess the bit between the buildings is 2 footways and two-way traffic. We took out 1 lane of traffic and used that space, or reallocated that space, to provide a wider footway for pedestrians. In part, that was for social distancing reasons, and we provided a contraflow cycle lane as part of a cross-city route. And the resulting change is actually just, as you can see on the right-hand side, is enabling a bit more space for pedestrians and cyclists on the street. This was part of Devon's emergency active travel measures in response to the coronavirus pandemic. Specifically, social distancing had reduced capacity on public transport, so councils were required to provide more space for pedestrians and cyclists. The idea being those were people who would have got public transport before, don't own a car, and would have had to walk or cycle. We had 8 weeks to implement measures because it was an emergency, and in Exeter, we aimed to link up the employment sites on the east of Exeter to the city centre, where there's also lots of employment, and the hospital. And we did this by reallocating some road space. And the most prominent example was the creation of a cross-city strategic cycle route, which is 5 kilometres in length. We did this for a set of, I think surgical was the word Tom used, which is probably quite apt, of a number of key interventions to provide a low traffic route across the city. That included a mix of, say, closing roads through traffic through barriers, such as Ludwell Lane on the top right-hand side, or it could have been signed, like on the bottom left at Wanford Road, where we still enable buses and cyclists to go along. And Magdalen Road is also part of this route. I guess what that enabled us to do is essentially provide, a 5 kilometre route across the city overnight. We implemented this in June 2020. It costs us around 50 to 100,000, and a lot of that is the cost of maintaining the kit until something's made permanent. And to make it permanent would be, around £200,000 a kilometre to provide a route across the whole city, which is a very different way of doing things. And comparing that to a more traditional approach, I've put another route in Exeter. I mean, I could have put things like the Tarka Trail, the Ex-Estuary Trail, Drake's Trail, as similar examples, but these high quality new routes take many years to do. The Exeter example, we started it in 2018. We've spent a reasonable chunk of money so far. We're only about 50% of the way through, and delivering new high quality infrastructure that's separate from vehicles is costing around 1.5 million a kilometre, and as a result, taking much longer to deliver. So I think the reallocation is a new tool or a different way of doing things. But obviously, there's things to consider. In these instances, just by using point closures, we still maintained access to properties. It just mean they might have had a slightly longer journey. And you do need to retain access to properties and loading, particularly for retail premises. If you are going to close a street, what's the impact on other neighbouring streets? And one, from a quality of life perspective and congestion, but in particular, does that have a knock-on implication of public transport? Because obviously that's very important to green travel as well. Does it impact on freight, which is obviously vital to the economy? And there are people who require access to a car for business or mobility needs that can't be ignored. So there's a few things you need to weigh up. An example of where we've tried to do this, I don't know if it's right or not, it's just to put an example of what we've done, is that we have a strategic cycle network identified in Exeter, and this is the coloured routes in purple, blue, red, sort of yellow, and they go across cities. They're long cycle routes, but we chose to put them in between the main highway corridors because those main corridors carry a huge amount of traffic, public transport routes, freight, and also constrained by railway bridges. So to take space, to reallocate space there would have a significant impact on vehicle capacity. So the approach we took in Exeter was to focus those routes away from the main radial corridors, but places perhaps you could reallocate space. And I guess to finish, there's lots of pros and cons on this, but I think to give a flavour of our experience in Exeter, we put in 9 temporary schemes, and 6 of those we've had really positive feedback, and it hasn't just been about transport. There is stuff about walking and cycling is safer, but there's also people talking about their quality of life, their interaction with neighbours. We've had 2 of the 9 where we've had mixed feedback, so roughly 50-50, and 1 scheme which has been negatively received, and we removed it. And some of the comments coming up, I think it was raised by some of the members in the break, was that it increases local journey times and can force people onto routes that are already congested by traffic. So there is a balance between the impacts of any of these changes. But what I would say, and I think we've been fortunate with trials, is that we've been able to, people like the status quo, I think, or people were more comfortable with the status quo. The trial has enabled us to do something differently and then ask people what they think about it. And I guess to finish, an example of that is the Magdalen Road scheme, where there was a lot of feedback initially about removing two-way traffic. But when we went to do a large public consultation earlier this year, 75% of people were in favour of reducing traffic through that street. So, there's mixed views on this from the public, but I think the perception we've had from schemes we've done is that public are broadly in favour. Well, that's my slides. Thank you for listening.
Great, thanks.